is... All right, well, thank you very much for having me here. Hey, John Dwyer, my buddy here. All right, so anyways, I am hoping to give you a little bit of a view into what I think is really the future development of possibilities. And so just to give you a little bit of context of where I'm coming from, I work with the Framingham Heart Study, which started in 1948. These are actually original pictures from there. And I'm just going to ask everybody in this room, how many people get your blood pressure measured when you go to the doctor? Everybody, right? That is the impact of the Framingham Heart Study on your life. They actually define what high blood pressure even is.
Blood pressure going up. Active experiment.
But anyways, when Framingham was commissioned, people were dying of heart disease and stroke and no one knew why. And so Framingham was commissioned as a 20-year study by the NIH to figure out those factors. In fact, in 1961, when Framingham published its first study, it defined the concept of risk factors. We didn't even have that idea. So Framingham really opened up the field of preventive medicine. Now, in that context, let's see. There we go. So my work actually is focused on, even though it's a heart study, is on the brain. But when I first came into Framingham in 1990, the concept of cognitive testing was actually very scary to our participants. So I was really worried about whether, when I was doing these tests, was I really capturing their cognitive capabilities in the way that I need to accurately. And that problem became even more acute when we moved from our Caucasian-based population into our multi-ethnic omni cohorts, where most cognitive tests are actually designed for native speakers of English. So the concept of actually testing non-native speakers of English with cognitive tests was actually a real problem that I was confronting at the time. And really the problems that I was confronting at Framingham are the same problems that we confront throughout the US. And in fact, as I moved my research from the US and based at Framingham and started to look at other parts of the world, I realized that the problems actually were much more stark. In fact, if we look at the population today, we have a rapidly aging population. For the first time ever, there are more people over the age of 65 than under the age of 5. And I do a lot of work in China. And here's a very stark fact in China, okay? They have the most rapidly aging population in the world. In fact, right now they have 250 million elderly, and in the coming years, their elderly population will outnumber the entire population of the US. And here's something that's really striking. They have no PhD programs in neuropsychology. So how are they going to assess a population in which they have no expertise? So that's really the challenge. And so when I think about what are the solutions, I worry about not testing hundreds of people, thousands of people. I worry about how are we going to reach millions of people. So where do I start? I start with Framingham because it turns out that what's bad for your heart is bad for your brain. So I was able to take all the data that's been collected over all the decades of time and apply it. And then on top of that, I added sort of the cognitive components as well as neuroimaging and neuropathology. But what I'm going to focus in on is what we're doing at Framingham related to precision AD medicine that really sort of encompasses digital technologies. So that's really the focus of what I'm trying to emphasize. So there are really two ways in which to think about how we're going to approach the problem. And the one that's predominating right now that Hugo was mentioning is this idea of precision AD medicine. which is the right treatment for the right person at the right time. But how are we going to achieve that when we're talking about a very heterogeneous disease that we're not even well characterized? So let me start out. Now you listen.
926. 926.
All right, so that's a participant's response to the exact same neuropsychological test, all right? And so in 2009, we deemed that this person is cognitively intact. But years later, we determined that they were now cognitively impaired. But if you actually listen to the response itself, 926, that response was correct. Okay, that's the correct response to the test question. So using traditional neuropsych assessment tools, you would have said this person is fine. But in fact, I think when you listen to the response, the second one, you could hear a difference in their voice, right? So that's the concept of where we think digital technologies can really make a difference. It's what Howard had alluded to in this concept of digital biomarkers. In fact, at Framingham, we have collected 9,000, almost 9,000 of these digital voice recordings, which are people's spoken responses to our neuropsychological tests. And in that, we've been doing it since 2005, so there is a subset of people who have actually progressed to dementia. So we are initiating some proof of concept studies that look to see, can we actually identify digital voice biomarkers that separate out those who are cognitively impaired versus those who are not. And our initial proof of concept study of just, about 200 of these recordings, we are able to achieve a predictive model as high as 90%. We still have a lot of work to do, but it certainly shows some promise. So similar to that, in 2011, we introduced the use of a digital pen. So usually when you do a neuropsychological test, you ask people to write their responses. Well, instead of a regular pen, we ask them to do a digital pen. And so what you're watching right now is someone's performance on one of our neuropsychological tests. And if you notice along the way, you can see changes in pauses. And along the bottom here, you have a colored coding that actually represents changes in velocity as the person moves from one item to another. So what I'm hoping you're getting a feel for is the level of granular information that we can now track on a person's cognitive capabilities that will allow us to detect this performance much earlier than we have been before. So I'll give you another example. We started using this with the clock time test using proprietary software developed out of MIT and Leahy Clinic. Clock drawing test, you just draw a picture of the clock, set the time, the numbers. You do it to copy and command. It takes about 2 minutes. From that software, they get over 1,000 metrics. So that really gives you an idea of what subtlety of behavior we can start to detect. So, a new study that we're about to launch with Life Molecular Imaging is actually a PET amyloid tau study where you've now heard those are the key neuropathological biomarkers of Alzheimer's disease. Those are the known biomarkers, right? But what we're going to do in addition is we're going to do this digital data collection. And our goal is actually to see if we can find digital profiles that highly correlate with these amyloid and tau scans and thereby identify surrogate biomarkers of tau positivity and amyloid tau positivity. And that's going to allow us to start trying to screen people who are at risk for this disease at much greater levels. Because I want you to think about how ubiquitous is voice. Think about how are we going to screen millions of people for clinical trial studies if we're dependent on very expensive PET imaging or cheaper but very invasive lumbar punctures for cerebral spinal fluid. Now, if instead we can start to detect those same positivity through voice, that's going to be independent of education. It's going to be independent of language, where you sit, rural, urban, etc. So that's really the power of what we think is possible. All right, let's see. So let me now let me center on this concept of digital biomarkers. When I first started using this idea, actually I was reprimanded because people told me you cannot say the words digital and biomarker together because biomarkers have to have a biological base. But I would argue that that's actually not the case. I think that the concept of a biomarker is any kind of signal that can be highly accurate, either from a diagnostic standpoint or prognostic standpoint. And it turns out that the FDA now agrees with this. They've started their own health innovation action plan, and they've actually defined the concept of trying to discover digital biomarkers. So I get to talk about it much more freely than I used to. So what we've done along this line is we've developed a brain health monitoring platform. And it really contains these components to allow us to anchor to what we know in the clinic and then start to use digital technology to collect information outside and really allow us to expand sort of our base of monitoring. And this is actually really the vision that I have. So remember, I'm trying to think about how am I going to assess people's cognitive assessments and do it in a much more accurate way. Well, it turns out everything we do through our brain. So when you interact with your environment, you're always reflecting your cognitive capabilities. Therefore, I think that we're going to reach the point where if I can monitor people's natural behaviors in their own environment, I can start to infer to cognition rather than test cognition. So to that end, what we're doing is we're building a commercialized version of a technology ecosystem that I put together called the Brain Health Monitoring Platform. We actually have a private investment company. We should have an enterprise version of this ready by the fall to deploy. And the key thing here is that this is an ecosystem of technologies. It's not about one technology, it's about multiple technologies coming together in order to accurately assess brain health. We're deploying it across a number of different sites. I hope to deploy it within John Dwyer's global Alzheimer's platform because he tells me that in order to populate all the clinical trial studies that we need, you have to screen 30 million people. And I think about how are you going to do that, and I think this platform is going to help us. This is where I think we need to focus in on is taking all this data that we collect and create an open science data sharing platform. And why? Because this is actually going to be the way in which we get to digital biomarkers. Because it turns out that the concept of digital biomarkers is still a concept. And in order to drive it to reality, we're going to have to take this data resource, we're going to have to open it up to data science, artificial intelligence community, and we need to open it up to wherever they sit. There are really, really smart people all over the world, and we need to get this data into their hands. And then what we're going to do to accelerate the whole process is we're going to keep accumulating data, and we're going to keep sharing it. And we're going to share it over and over and over again, and that's how we're going to get to digital biomarkers for this disease. So what's the impact of this success if we're successful? I think we're going to drive down healthcare costs, and we're going to increase health quality. Why is that? Because Alzheimer's disease is an insidious onset disease, as is most chronic diseases in this country. 86% of diseases in the U.S. are chronic diseases. And what happens is with the medical model, we're waiting until you hit a certain threshold, and then we're intervening then. And because most of our diseases are chronic, it's driving our healthcare costs at uncontrollable levels because we're really good once you get sick of treating you and treating you for a really long time. So the key here in an insidious onset process is to catch it early and then intervene then, and then maybe you change the trajectory and you prevent the disease altogether. And that's how we're going to drive down both healthcare costs and increase health quality. So my last words to you is to really think about the fact that we need to approach this problem in a much different way. We need to be thinking about things in a different way. I don't know that this is the right way, but what I do know is we have ample evidence that we're not yet getting to the right way. And so what I suggest is that we think differently. That's it.